It would fall in stages, starting with the weakest point, as you mentioned, and it would fall over. It wouldn't fall straight down through the path of greatest resistance, which is the columns, particularly the 80 columns in World Trade Center 7, which were almost solid steel at the floor, which NIST claims is the initiation of collapse.
Through here, the red area is showing where we had observed structural damage. You see there's a little bit of...
They say the main reason for the collapse were normal office fires, not the diesel as first thought.
You can see here we either have large sagging or buckling occurring in some of these floor beams, and these circles indicate the condition of the connections, where yellow is a partial failure and a pink is a full failure where the entire connection no longer is attached to the column.
Other skyscrapers haven't fully collapsed before because of fire, but what happened on 9/11 was unique. Tower 7 was built over an electricity substation. There were many fires, and crucially, firefighters could not fight the fires in Tower 7. They didn't have enough water and focused on saving lives.
Our working hypothesis now actually suggests that it was normal building fires.
We can say that the official theory about the towers is disproved as thoroughly as any such theory could possibly be. These facts taken together render the likelihood of the official theory essentially zero. The official theory is therefore an outrageous theory, whereas the alternative theory is, from a scientific point of view, the only possible theory.
Aloha and welcome back. This is part 2 of my program produced for Press TV a couple of years back regarding the BBC and their criminal conspiracy to cover up those who were responsible for the 9/11 false flag event. Of course, those of you who know me know damn well where I stand with regard to that. Any of us who are serious about 9/11 truth know damn well that Israeli Mossad's fingerprints are all over the event, including the Jewish billionaires Frank Lowy and Larry Silverstein, who bought the buildings so that they could have full access and allow Israeli Mossad agents into the building and do what needed to be done in order to bring the building down, along with traitors in the U.S. government and military, including so-called dual nationals. These are the responsible parties for 9/11 and the destruction of property by Michael Chertoff, another dual national, Jewish supremacist, probably Talmudic, pedophile, bankster, cultist himself. This man is criminally responsible for covering up the crimes of 9/11 by destroying evidence which was essential to a legitimate investigation. Again, Michael Chertoff, Frank Lowy, Larry Silverstein, and many others are the key players, again, along with traitors in the U.S. military and government, many of whom are still very much there pulling the strings or even in the public eye to some degree. This is the reality of 9/11, and you know, thankfully more and more people are seeing the obvious, and I'm happy and very proud of the fact that so many more people, especially a lot of younger people with new channels, are getting up and saying what needs to be said. Speaking truth about those in power, the truths that you speak, which inevitably lead to problems for you. If you have a YouTube channel, many of you know, recently there has been a spate, a real increase in the shutting down of YouTube channels. This agenda is only going to continue further, I'm quite sure of it, but this is a good thing, in my opinion. In fact, I've had a community guidelines strike, as I've had in the past. My record was clean after, you know, I don't produce that many videos, but, you know, so when I get a strike, eventually the strike goes away. I had 0 strikes, but last week I got a strike for a video I produced 6 years ago regarding Sandy Hook, which leads us to another subject, the obvious agenda of taking the guns away from U.S. citizens. I really, really, really want to appeal to those of you on the so-called left, the liberal-leaning circles, including many of you who appreciate my work and whom respect me and whom I respect you conversely on most every issue, or many issues, let's say. Do you not know that there is an agenda to take away the guns from the American citizens. I hope you at least know that. There is this agenda, and those in power are orchestrating the agenda. Now, you may think that that's purely for public safety, but again, I wonder, what is your thinking here? And how is it possible that you genuinely believe that in these times where the U.S. government increasingly around the world is seen for what it is, irrational at best, extremely dangerous for sure, and completely tyrannical in every way, why would you allow such an entity to take away more power from the people in order to give itself even greater power? Whether you hate, love the Second Amendment or not, can you at least not see that having heavily armed police, military, intelligence services, and all of the other institutions of power, having all of these institutions heavily armed, already corrupted as they are, and committing mass murder on so many different levels around the world, why would you want to give a government of that stature even more power, and worse yet, at the expense of taking away what few rights and power remains for the American people? I don't understand this. And are you also completely unaware of how false flag events, i.e. events that are carried out in order to be blamed on a certain individual or a certain country or a certain group, in order to push through an agenda? How many of you on the lefty liberal circles, in those circles, how many of you are unaware of false flags and how they work? Seriously, do you not understand how this works? Because if you understand that, then you will know that any event of any significant nature, especially so-called quote-unquote terrorism, almost always, not always, but almost always, in one way or another, is being carried out by the same powers that be that also claim to have a solution for us. And in this case, it's to take away the guns, of course, step by step. And assault rifles don't really have much use in a normal civilian circumstances. But if you were facing armed ATF agents or police, or, you know, trying to live your life in peace and find yourself needing to defend yourself, which I hope none of us ever has to do, but to ignore that possibility exists, to me seems delusional at best. And I say this not as a lover of guns. I'm really not. I look forward to a world in which really, literally, there'll be no need for any such weapons. I mean, the fact that we spend so much time and energy developing weapons and allowing this as people, never-ending streams of new weapons of mass destruction and, you know, hundreds of millions of firearms and all this kind of stuff. Clearly a better world will not entail that. But let's be serious here. There's an agenda to take away the guns from the American people, and those guns can and will be used by American patriots who will not lie down and bow when this tyrannical government just completely and totally reveals itself to the American people. Does it really need to reach the absolute crisis level before you realize that? How much more tyrannical does the U.S. government need to be before you say, I'm not going to participate in the relinquishment of any more power, concede any more power to this government? At what point do you say that? Are you waiting for Obama to come back or something? The guy who didn't shut down Guantanamo Bay, who didn't get us out of Iraq, who lied over and over and said he was going to get rid of nuclear weapons too? What are you waiting for? I don't understand. I'm kind of baffled by that. Again, I say that not as a gun lover. Now, getting back to the YouTube thing, I've had my first strike. I imagine that they're going to shut down my channel. We'll see. We'll see. You know, but this strike for a YouTube video I produced 6 years ago regarding Sandy Hook, which, by the way, had some really good information about the gun agenda, taking the guns away. So it makes sense that they would have come after that video. It's now gone, and I've lost it, actually. I didn't have a record of that, but I took down all of my other videos, so I have them. I'm going to be putting all of my YouTube videos. I'll edit out a few that weren't all that great, but all of my best videos I'm going to be putting on DTube. So please go to DTube, register, and become a viewer over there, because if my channel does get shut down, well, there you go. You'll be able to have access there, and I'll continue to produce new content in that forum. Also Vimeo, but DTube is where I'm going to give it a shot for now. Also, I encourage all of you to please download my videos while they're there on YouTube. Just do it. Have them on your hard drive, and if my channel gets shut down, post them. You know, if I'm not able to do it, then post them. There's already so many videos out there. It makes any kind of attack on me or any other right-thinking, forward-thinking person makes it difficult. We can turn their negative actions into positives for us. So I'm ready to embrace that. I'm ready to embrace my YouTube channel being shut down. If indeed that's what needs to happen for me to speak the truth, no problem. That's a price I'm willing to pay. And I'll move forward in the most intelligent way possible. So with your help, there won't be no shutting down of any critical channels. In fact, those channels they think to shut down or even shut down are going to get bigger in the end. And make no mistake about it, if they shut down my YouTube channel, I'll put extra effort into making a bigger channel elsewhere. So no problem, no problem. Whatever they want to do, no problem. I'm going to still focus on what I got to do. And that's a good way, I think, to lead into this BBC program. Again, I'm proud of this program. It makes clear where the BBC stands. They are not just propagandists. They are criminally responsible for covering up the crimes of 9/11 and protecting those directly responsible. I look forward to the day where executives within the BBC and other such institutions face justice for real, because the amount of people who have died as a result of the propaganda from these lying, cheating bastards, we can't even count it. So this isn't about producing programs for television. This is about facilitating mass murder. And ain't a world without that kind of shit going to be a much more beautiful place to be. I look forward to it immensely. And I thank everyone for your support once again, especially if they're looking to shut me down. I please encourage you to go to Patreon, give what you can. This provides independence to not just me, but other producers. When we can rely on people directly who appreciate our work to support us directly with no real middleman, although Patreon does have some issues, for now they seem to be pretty legit. And if we continue to support each other directly, we will win. And I say once again, the powers that be are shitting themselves, because we do indeed have the most powerful weapon of all, and we shall not sacrifice it for anything. And I don't care, I hear this all the time. One last point, all the time I hear people who are otherwise aware complaining, basically, about how nobody cares. I tell my friends and family, none of them want to know, they just want to watch football, blah, 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 blah. Stop focusing on these people. Please. Be aware of the fact that never in human history have so many human beings been coming into consciousness at one time. This is happening right now, and it is immensely powerful. And the one last task that really remains for us is to find a way to meaningfully come together, which, by the way, I actually have a plan for that. Delayed as it is, and it will be launched this year. So I'll be talking more specifically about that, but I ask and urge all of you who are aware to stop getting depressed and stop getting disenfranchised, and stop feeling dissuaded and discouraged. There are ever-growing numbers of people who are joining the ranks of human men and women who are conscious, aware, awake, and steady, and committed to the truth. Ever-increasing numbers, unprecedented numbers. Stop focusing on those who are not. Don't worry about them. God love them. They'll come around. Don't worry. They're waiting for some leadership by example. So be part of that leadership that actually sets the stage, which those on the stage have honor and integrity. And by leading that way, the masses, including your loved ones, your friends and family, they'll come around. God love them. Don't worry about that. Let's be realistically optimistic, because this world is indeed what we make of it, and if we want a better world, then we shall make it so.
In the previous episode of In Focus, we exposed the methods used by the BBC to extort billions of pounds from the UK public. We focused on the BBC Charter as a social contract between the BBC and the UK public, and identified where the BBC is in gross breach of its obligations to the public.
People will die because of the BBC decision. Let me be clear about that.
In this episode, we shall present proof that the BBC is knowingly withholding information that ultimately poses a grave threat to the public. Furthermore, we shall establish that in so doing, the BBC is providing material support to terrorists responsible for 9/11.
There are many deeply disturbing truths that humanity must recognize if we're to be serious about addressing the grave dangers we face. Primary among them is the fact that our governments and the mainstream media are not here to serve the interests of the people. To the contrary, they're here to serve the interests of a tiny minority who lust for power and profit from war.
The BBC, between its television and radio broadcasting, probably broadcasts to more places in the world than any other network on earth. And they are essentially protected by the British government when they make statements that support the ends that the British government has supported.
The BBC is a government department and a department of the intelligence network of Britain.
The two component parts of the security services and some of the high levels of the BBC are almost inseparable.
Acknowledging that many examples can be cited to affirm the injurious role of the BBC and UK government, the false WMD threat sold to the public so as to justify the invasion and occupation of Iraq is just one example, we are wise to look at the social contracts between the public and the BBC, as well as the public and the UK government. As discussed in the previous episode, the BBC receives billions of pounds from the UK public and thus has many contractual obligations to them. Paramount among these obligations lies in Section 1 of the BBC Charter. Quote, "The BBC exists to serve the public interest." End of quote. Acknowledging that public interest is a vague term, all sane people will agree that withholding information from the public that protects terrorists is not in the public interest. But more on that later.
The only time that the BBC has covered anything to do with the conspiratorial view of 9/11 was to set up and ridicule anyone that was saying actually the official story is not true.
The evidence points to intelligence mistakes before 9/11. The 9/11 conspiracy theories are just that, theories. The evidence doesn't support them.
So far from just even ignoring another view of what happened on 9/11, which they have largely done, when they have addressed it, it's been to ridicule those that were questioning it. That's not only not fair and not balanced, it's fundamentally biased in the way that they're dealing with this.
Indeed, the BBC has used significant yet unknown amounts of license fee payers' money to portray anyone who does not accept the official version of 9/11 as irrational, borderline crazy, and ultimately childlike and gullible. The following clip comes from a program entitled 9/11 Road Trip, and it encapsulates the BBC's agenda extremely well.
As people, they're nice. They're nice people. There's nothing, you know. It's kind of odd. They're incredibly cynical, yet incredibly kind of childlike and gullible at the same time, you know what I mean? But these five people, well, to various shades as we're learning, to a certain extent, all five of them believe that the American government wiped out their own people with civilian planes.
It is propaganda by omission. That's how they do it. And they're guilty of sin. And I'm on record as saying they're guilty of sin, and I stand by it absolutely. It's very, very easily provable.
I think the BBC has been rather like the health service. Far too many highly paid executives at the top compared to the number of people at the coalface. And the name of the game becomes protecting backside.
The BBC's executive are towing the line completely and won't allow any threatening criticism of our government agenda. When it comes to having high salaries, they're not prepared to speak up and be counted, because what it needs is moral courage to stand up and say, I am not putting my name to that because it's wrong, and I'm not. But without that moral courage and that soul, the evil will prosper.
Well, people need to face it with moral courage. They need to embrace their moral compass rather than their legal compass. You really do. Look at the results of 9/11. Look at the amount of damage and the amount of death that we've caused around the planet. Irrespective of the terrorist attack that happened on the day, look at what's happening as a response. We need to have the moral courage to stand up and address this. We really do.
When you look at 9/11 and the official story of 9/11, which, you know, I mean, as fairy tales go, I can't better it, frankly. But there are many, many, many people all over the world now. Some of them are groups of airline pilots that say you could never do that with those planes and all that stuff with the story that we're given. Structural engineers, people even the system would say were credible. They're saying the 9/11 official story is impossible.
I mean, we're talking about an initiation of collapse due to thermal expansion.
Richard Gage is the founder and CEO of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. He represents over 2,300 architects and engineers who have strictly applied the scientific method in the process of concluding that WTC-7 was brought down by controlled demolition. Here he explains the nonsensical official version of events, however.
What they say is that these beams, long span beams, 50-foot long beams, pushed a girder off of its seat on column 79, causing the internal failure for 9 floors. And then this column 79 finally buckles, allowing the internal collapse all the way up to the top and then laterally. All that happens in 15 seconds, by the way, at a rate of failure of 400 structural steel connections per second. It's ludicrous to suggest that fire could cause that. Well, then the building comes down in 7 seconds at free fall acceleration. What can cause that? The only thing that can do that is if explosives remove those columns synchronistically timed floor by floor and virtually all at once on each floor.
The absurdity of the official version of what caused the symmetrical free-fall collapse of WTC-7 into its own footprint is self-evident. Despite this, many attempts to overturn the laws of physics and defy reason can be cited by the BBC. When examined through the prism of critical thought, we can see clearly a willful intent by the BBC to deceive and ultimately disempower the public they are meant to serve.
Dr. Gene Corley was the lead investigator. A structural engineer for 50 years, he did the forensic work on the Oklahoma City bombing, on the Waco fire, as well as the World Trade Center, all subjects of conspiracy theories.
We looked at everything. Controlled demolition was ruled out because there was no evidence of controlled demolition.
And you looked for evidence of it?
We looked for it, yes. And we found no evidence of controlled demolition.
Every inch of the site was picked over by hundreds of people. No one reported any signs of explosives.
This is truly astounding. Here you have Gene Corley, a structural engineer for 50 years. This man is the chief investigator into the collapse of the Twin Towers and WTC-7, and he is saying to a BBC reporter that there is, quote, no evidence of controlled demolition. This is astounding. In a day and age where we're supposed to have genuine journalism, you have a BBC reporter accepting the chief investigator claiming that there is no evidence such as the firemen and first responders who heard multiple explosions in the buildings, no evidence in the form of molten metal, no evidence in the form of free fall acceleration, no evidence in the form of symmetrical collapse into its own footprint. We can go on and on and on, but the fact is that the BBC accepted what is a patently false answer, a lie, and in fact, any serious investigation into the collapse of World Trade Center 7 and the Twin Towers makes clear that there is far more evidence to support controlled demolition than there is in fact for a fire, an office fire. In fact, there is no precedent. Never in the history of our world has a steel frame building collapsed
from an office fire, and yet 3 buildings, we are told, collapsed on that day, and we're supposed to accept that as if it makes any sense. The key here is that the BBC does not challenge this patently false lie.
Control Demolition Incorporated is one of the world's leading demolition companies. Mark Loiseau has been in this family business all his life. He knows what it takes to bring a building down.
The largest steel structure we've taken down, which I think is still a Guinness record, is the J.L. Hudson building in Detroit. I saw thermite once in high school. It was very impressive, but I've never seen anyone use a material which melts steel for demolition purposes. I don't see how you could possibly get all of the columns to melt through at the same time.
This is truly extraordinary once again. Here we have a demolitions expert who is stating very, very clearly that he sees no possible way that thermite could be used to actually bring down the building in a symmetrical free-fall manner. And yet, the BBC reporter is right there and could easily ask the question, well, if thermite can't do it, what is supposed to make us believe that a fire, an office fire, can somehow compromise all of the joints within this steel-structured building and bring it down symmetrically at free fall speed? Instead of the BBC questioning the validity of office fires bringing down the building, which would require the same level of timing, instantaneously, symmetrically, all the supports collapsing and imploding all at the same time, that's not possible with thermite. It certainly isn't possible with the office fire now, is it?
The BBC have withheld a huge amount of extremely powerful evidence which basically proves that the official story of 9/11 is not only false, it's completely impossible. So the BBC have certainly been in gross breach of their requirements through the Royal Charter and editorial guidelines on the issue of 9/11.
Well, what they did is they spoke for NIST at the time. NIST was denying free fall, saying there'd be no structure below if it fell at free fall. But later on, after the BBC's program, NIST acknowledges free fall. So this has not been retracted or corrected by the BBC. In fact, their program has been taken off the air and off their archives.
If the true perpetrators are not being exposed through the withholding of that information, then there's the potential for those perpetrators to commit similar acts in the future. So that definitely puts the public in danger, and the public need to have that information so that the perpetrators of these crimes can actually be exposed and held to account.
One of the most transparent and sinister methods of deception is that of selling impossible theories, including some that blatantly defy the laws of physics, through the use of so-called computer models.
The government just loves their computer models, don't they? They really do. What they do is they give you a completely unrealistic scenario, and then they create a computer model to illustrate the scenario that they've given you.
With no steel from Tower 7 to study, investigators have instead made 4 complex computer models, worked out to the finest detail. They're confident their approach will provide the answers. Purdue University has built a computer model to show how the damage inside the Pentagon is likely to have happened. And its animation matches what this structural engineer saw when he went into the building.
It blew out a bunch of columns, and then as it went through, the fuel exploded more and more. So there were all these explosions that went out from where the plane was. And that's why it was a big round hole, because the explosive forces made the round hole.
When you look at 9/11 and you look at everything that's going on with the war on terror, just look at what you're being told by the government. Look at it for yourself and analyse it with your own mind, and look at what they're telling you, and then add the numbers up and see if they balance. The books don't balance.
The small size of the hole can easily be explained because it is where the remnants of the plane came out, leaving almost all the debris and passengers inside.
The BBC, since September 11th, has descended into just sheer and utter extremist propaganda. They're in utter denial about these 9/11 and the whole war on terrorism. issue, they actually reported that Building 7 came down on September 11th, 20 minutes before it came down. Somebody fed them the script, but it got there too early.
The BBC have been part of the construct that supports that narrative, and to my mind, that makes them fully complicit in it. This isn't a case of keeping quiet. This is proactively going out of their way to perpetuate the monstrous lie and the tyrannical cover of horrendous acts of terrorism against our own citizens.
Investigators have focused on the east side, where the long floor spans were under most stress. They think fires burnt long enough to weaken and break many of the connections that held the steel structure together.
At 5:20, the building drops like a rock, straight down virtually, into its own footprint, just about, at freefall acceleration. For at least a third of its fall, it's falling freely. There's 40,000 tons of structural steel in this building, 5 times stronger than it needed to be in order to keep it up and from falling anywhere. So all of a sudden, what must have happened is those columns had to have been removed.
Our working hypothesis now actually suggests that it was normal building fires that were growing and spreading throughout the multiple floors that may have caused the ultimate collapse of the buildings.
That pretty much covers the number one problem here. It's intuitive for most everybody to realize that a building can't fall as fast as a bowling ball falling off of it without slowing down as a result of the columns, these 80 massive columns in this building.
The deputy chief of the New York Fire Department that day remembers the scene.
Well, we had our special operations people set up surveying instruments to monitor and see if there was any movement of the building. We were concerned of the possibility of collapse of the building. And we had a discussion with one particular engineer there, and we asked him if we allowed it to burn, could we anticipate a collapse, and if so, how soon? And it turned out that he was pretty much right on the money, that he said in its current state you have about 5 hours.
Because this would have been the third steel structure building in the history of the world to fall down. So why did they, A, have any reason to believe it was going to fall down? Because there were no precedents for it. We didn't have any reports on it at that stage. And then, of course, the report eventually comes out in 2008 that the building fell down due to fire. Well, I don't believe it. I simply don't believe it, and neither do 2,000 architects and engineers around the world, and millions of others for that matter. You don't have to be a scientist to see that the building was demolished.
You have connections that essentially don't have strength for the loads that they are being subjected to, and you have this massive failure of a column. It does not take time. The structure has lost all integrity at that point in time.
It would fall in stages, starting with the weakest point, as you mentioned, and it would fall over. It wouldn't fall straight down through the path of greatest resistance, which is the columns, particularly the 80 columns in World Trade Center 7, which were almost solid steel at the floor, which NIST claims is the initiation of collapse.
Through here, the red area is showing where we had observed structural damage. You see there's a little bit of...
They say the main reason for the collapse were normal office fires, not the diesel as first thought.
You can see here we either have large sagging or buckling occurring in some of these floor beams, and these circles indicate the condition of the connections, where yellow is a partial failure and a pink is a full failure where the entire connection no longer is attached to the column.
Other skyscrapers haven't fully collapsed before because of fire. But what happened on 9/11 was unique. Tower 7 was built over an electricity substation. There were many fires, and crucially, firefighters could not fight the fires in Tower 7. They didn't have enough water and focused on saving lives.
Our working hypothesis now actually suggests that it was normal building fires.
We can say that the official theory about the towers is disproved as thoroughly as any such theory could possibly be. These facts taken together render the likelihood of the official theory essentially zero. The official theory is therefore an outrageous theory, whereas the alternative theory is, from a scientific point of view, the only possible theory.
The 21st century has thus far been dominated by never-ending policies of war, just like the 20th century. All of this is largely justified by the events of 9/11. Truth be told, however, the gulf between the reality of 9/11 and what we're being told could hardly be any larger. The real issue here is actually one of cognitive dissonance. So what is cognitive dissonance?
Well, cognitive dissonance is people's inability to see that which is right before their eyes because of the effect it will have on their reality. Basically, you're looking at information which is causing you to completely rethink your entire belief system, what your life has been about up to this point, and this is hugely confrontational to people, and they just don't want to go there. I've had people tell me that even if the official story is true, I don't want to know because I'm safe here, it works for me when I'm in this little bubble, I don't want to know about what's going on outside. And the implications of what things like 9/11 mean, the implications of the government actually doing that themselves and then going and murdering millions of people around the planet as a response is just far too much for people to bear, and so they just go into complete denial.
As much as I'd like to reach every viewer of this program, the fact of the matter is that only those who can think for themselves, who do not suffer from cognitive dissonance, will be able to retain the information presented.
Well, there's a piece of legislation in the UK, the Terrorism Act 2000.
Tony Rook refused to pay the BBC license fee, and in a landmark case, he argued that paying the BBC to produce 9/11 propaganda was tantamount to funding the purposes of terrorism.
And Section 15, Article 3 is very clear, and it prescribes if you have reasonable cause to believe you could be funding the purposes of terrorism or just directly towards terrorism, then obviously you don't pay. Now, this piece of legislation is obviously aimed at groups like Al-Qaeda and all these boogeymen, but because of the way the BBC have behaved and the propaganda by omission over the events of 9/11, I was genuinely concerned that they were complicit in the cover-up. And since the court case, I've become even more convinced of that, and the way that they responded or didn't respond to the correspondence that I sent them over the court case and asking them if they wanted to defend themselves. So yeah, I do have reasonable cause under law not to pay them. Very reasonable cause. You know, when you're chopping out, New York policemen saying move away from the building, it's about to blow up. Why are you chopping it out?
We have now a big problem. The international law is clear. Propaganda of war is the highest crime, because without this crime, all the other crimes, including ethnic cleansing, genocide, all of these crimes are impossible to do.
War propaganda is prohibited under international law, actually as part of the prohibition of aggression or the use of force in violation of international law.
So the BBC is a nest of war criminals and Orwellian propagandists, and the people behind its 9/11 propaganda need to be tried, sentenced, and hanged for treason and crimes against humanity.
There should be criminal charges brought against the BBC for its failure to report the truth on 9/11, because the official story is so absurd that it defies all logical analysis.
And one of the things that I have argued very often is that if we really want to have respect for the law, it's not the weakest that we have to prosecute, it's the most powerful we have to prosecute, because those are the ones that set the example.
Believe me, our governments are not going to solve any of the problems unless they are pushed to do so by informed public opinion. Therefore, I say what I describe as the media's betrayal of democracy is an issue that really ought to be most seriously addressed.
Let us be frank about the BBC. It sits in a very privileged position, able to extract billions of pounds from the UK public. Effectively, it's entered into a social contract under the BBC Charter. The seminal point of the BBC Charter is, in fact, its obligation to protect the public interest, to remain impartial. The BBC is in gross breach of its obligations to the UK public and, in fact, the global public. But with regard to 9/11, the BBC is flat out protecting the terrorists who are responsible for taking down Building 7. The BBC is withholding critical information which is vital to the public interest. In so doing, it is in fact a threat to the UK public and in violation of the Terrorism Act of 2000, Article 15, Section 3. it really makes you wonder, are we seriously supposed to pay the BBC to lie to us and produce propaganda in the 21st century?